What's up, everybody? And welcome into another episode of Windy City Gridiron Radio over at windycitygridiron.com for SB Nation. As always, your host with you, Robert Zaglinski, and I am pleased to be joined today to talk all things Bears draft, all things draft in general, by the self-proclaimed pre-serum Captain America, Benjamin Solak, who does excellent scouting work and draft work for NDT Scouting, and he also does Eagles stuff for Bleeding Green and Bleeding Green Nation Radio. So he is a jack of all trades, and like I said, he's a superhero in waiting. Ben, what's up?
Hey, thanks for having me on, Rob. I appreciate it, man.
Anytime. Was checking out a lot of your draft stuff, so I thought it'd be pretty applicable to to run in to what we wanted to discuss here, and let's jump into it right away. I sent this along to you, top combine storylines. One of them is this year's, in essence, I couldn't like describe it in a better way, but this year's Mitch Trubisky. So the Bears sit at number 8, and they're going to want teams to pick as many quarterbacks as possible because obviously they're not going to pick a new franchise guy at number 8 or a new ideal franchise guy at number 8. So who is that kind of guy this year? And I mean, what can we expect right before them? How many guys can we expect to go before them? And let's evaluate some of these guys as we go on down the line.
So we're talking about, who's that guy who's going to kind of jump forward and he's going to bring, that quarterback who's going to hop up to the front and bring all the other players down. Yeah, I think that you're going to see the big trade up guy is going to be Josh Rosen. That's my anticipation. From everything we've understood since before the Senior Bowl week, through the Senior Bowl week, into the Combine, it's that, Sam Darnold is the lead dog. 1 overall quarterback out of USC is likely going to go to the Browns. He's a young guy, and so there's a lot of development you can do there, but he's got a very high ceiling, and he's also when NFL evaluators make these decisions about quarterbacks, they always kind of want the most white bread personalities, and especially Cleveland, who kind of had the experience of the Johnny Manziel experiment, is going to gravitate that way, and so we expect them to go Darnold. Once you hit number 2, however, everything goes to seed. And it's surprising, as an Eagles fan and an Eagles analyst, you follow what the Giants do closely. If the Giants decide that they don't want to take a quarterback at the top, that's fine by me. To me, that's quite the silly decision. But it seems like 2 and then even 3 with Indianapolis are going to be trade-up targets, are going to be trade-up spots. And teams like Buffalo, teams like Arizona, teams even like Miami perhaps a little bit are going to be looking at those spots. Buffalo is enamored with Josh Rosen from what we understand, and I would envision they try to move up into 2 or into 3 to go get him. They have currently 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks, 2 third-round picks because of the trades that they've made coming into this season. And so I think Rosen is going to be that guy that QB-needy teams go up to try and go get, and that's going to push a little bit of talent down. Once you get past, you get past Indianapolis at 3, Cleveland at 4 isn't going to take a second quarterback. Then you're with the Broncos at 6. That's when we start to talk about 4 quarterbacks could go top 6. You still got Baker Mayfield, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen still on the board at this time. And the Jets are very likely going to need a young quarterback to bring in. The Broncos could be the team that lands Kirk Cousins, but if Minnesota is able to hook him, then you're going to see the Broncos go for quarterback as well, in my opinion. And all of a sudden, the Bears are sitting at 8. Only with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers ahead of them at 7, and only 2 non-quarterbacks have gone off the board. So that's a great situation for the Bears to be in. Very interesting. If Saquon Barkley makes it to 7, that's Tampa's pick to me, no question. And so you could be at the point where you see 2 quarterbacks, then Bradley Chubb and Minka Fitzpatrick, and then you got 2 more quarterbacks. Saquon Barkley heads off the board, and now the Bears are in a great spot. You got your pick of the litter as far as wide receivers go. You can go for any of those top. That's the ideal situation, I think, for Chicago.
I'm assuming when you say the Giants won't go quarterback, we're talking Saquon Barkley as the pick, essentially, or
right. That's what we're beginning to understand is that the Giants are willing to spend that number 2 overall pick on Saquon Barkley instead of a quarterback, which to me is bananas. Picking a running as a film first guy, Saquon Barkley is going to be one of my top 2 prospects, him or Quentin Nelson. Right now, Barkley is the lead to be number 1. Quentin Nelson might end up being the guy. We'll see. But from a team building perspective, it does not make sense to pick running backs in the top half of the first round. It simply doesn't. You do not get enough return on your value. I don't care what the talent level is. And again, Barkley's going to be one of my top guys. And again, Eagles analyst here. If the Giants want to do that, I'm so fine with it. All the more power to you. But yeah, that could shake things up. I much more envision the Giants trading back out of that spot, because if they don't want a quarterback, then they're going to shop number 2 hard. And because of the nature of this quarterback class, I think a lot of teams are going to want that number 2 pick. But if they're stuck staying there and they really don't want to bring in a quarterback, then yeah, it looks like it'll be Barkley.
In regards to the Jets and Broncos, so they're 2 teams. I highly doubt it more in regards to the Jets. The Broncos are more likely here. The Kirk Cousins situations, how would that play into them? Well, obviously that would play in greatly for them taking a quarterback and really jettisoning this entire storyline.
Yeah, so if you talked to me 3 months ago, maybe even 2 months ago, I would put good money on the Broncos landing Kirk Cousins, right? To me, that was a no-brainer. They had been at the point where the Broncos had been slow playing their quarterback situation in their quarterback room almost intentionally with their eyes set on Kirk Cousins. They wanted to bring him in. Then you reach the point where Minnesota gets all the way to the NFC Championship game with Case Keenum. They lose it with Case Keenum, and all of a sudden they sound like they're willing to shell out $30 million per year to a guy like Kirk Cousins, which to me is too much for Kirk Cousins, simply. But either way, the Broncos might get fleeced here at the 11th hour. The Broncos might really get the, kind of mugged in the back alley, in the sense that their entire plan has been contingent on, we're going to have the most money to bring in Kirk Cousins, coming with a decent amount of cap room, and also fresh off an NFC Championship game, and they're telling Kirk, you can stay in the conference and you can win this thing, right? And so the Broncos are at a point where they're very desperate for Kirk Cousins. They're going to make as big of a play for him as they possibly can. Of course, they've been doing their due diligence on the side. Of course, their college scouts have been checking out these quarterbacks. We know that they like Baker Mayfield a lot. We know that they're interested in the way that he plays. We know that Elway is going to gravitate to a Josh Allen out of Wyoming type. We know that's his prototype as far as quarterbacks that he likes. But they're at a point where for them, it's Kirk Cousins, and then you don't want to say or bust. They might move for Tannehill is something that I've heard they could potentially do. They might also be the team that then picks up Case Keenum out of Minnesota, brings in a draft pick as well, and kind of lets that hash itself out. But for the Broncos, it's really, really it all hinges on Kirk Cousins, absolutely. If they're at the point where they don't get him, they're absolutely going to have to go quarterback at 6. I don't see how they get away with not doing it.
A bit of a So we were also talking about the Colts, and as one of the bigger, and not that he's a bad player, but just in terms of his value as being essentially a running back, not a receiver, and one of the bigger anti-Jarvis Landry guys to add to your team. So something was floated around last night where we're talking Jarvis Landry to the Colts for the number 3 overall pick and the Dolphins number 11. So how does that factor in?
Right. That's a very interesting thing. And I like the fact that the Dolphins are floating that around. So I think that's a really good, smart way for their front office to, NFL teams, we know how much they value these draft picks, right? And so you throw in a guy like Landry who has some proven production, and then you only ask to move back about 8 spots. And obviously it's 3 to 11. That's still a significant amount. If we're talking trade value charts, that's about 1,000, right? So that would be the equivalent of like the 16th overall pick. Right, that's kind of what you're looking at there. But at the same time, we know how much these NFL teams love these draft picks, and I think the Colts certainly at a point where they need a ton of pieces, at a point where they're only going to have like 2 rostered wide receivers if they lose all their free agents or something, right? Like they're very thin there. I certainly think that that's a trade that the Colts are going to give some due diligence to. I'm not sure they pull the trigger on that. It depends on who they like and how they like them, how their board falls, but that's a good offer by Miami. Right, that could change things up drastically. If Miami's moving up to 3, then you're almost certainly seeing quarterbacks go 1, 2, 3. And it'll be very interesting because Miami's got to be careful. You move up to 3, you have to be calling New York and talking about what it would take to slide up into 2, right? Because if you're moving up into 3, that means you got a quarterback in mind. But all of a sudden, there's that giant spot, that number 2 slot right in front of you, and you don't know necessarily who you're potentially getting at that location. And so if Miami were to move up to 3, you're at the point where I think they need to also try to move up to 2. You're going to see a mad dash for that number 2 overall pick. The Giants are going to make a killing on that pick. It's going to be in high demand. And then you have to start to ask the question, could we see 5 quarterbacks go in the top 6? Which to me would be ludicrous. Right? That's unprecedented. That's absolutely insane. And so I don't know. You'll have to wonder then what happens on the free agency market, because it's still a strong free agent market as far as quarterbacks go. And so I think if you see Miami move up to 3 and that's kind of the first domino that falls, then I wouldn't be surprised if the Jets and the Broncos both try to look for a way to get out of 5 and 6. Thing is, those picks won't be in very high demand because so many quarterbacks will be driving value back, like we discussed. So Miami to 3 could be a huge, like a game-changing sort of a move.
Let me throw a curveball at you, and you're going to be I don't think you're going to be that receptive to it. The Buccaneers taking a quarterback and giving up on Jameis Winston.
And I mean, how many years does Jameis have left on his deal is kind of my question there. I don't envision giving up on a guy on his rookie deal, especially when you put a number 1 overall pick into him. Like, we know if you're a number 1 overall pick in this league, you will have value no matter what you do. Like, the Eagles moved Sam Bradford for a 1st and a 4th, despite the fact that he was bad and injured. And the entire reason behind that was simply because, he was an ex-first overall pick. Like, that just means too much to NFL evaluators. So Winston, okay, so he's in the 4th year of his deal, right? And he'll obviously have a 5th year option that the Buccaneers can pick up, which would equal the transition tag, which would probably be a little bit much what Jameis has given you. Mm-hmm. I don't, when you're a team that your defense was as shoddy as the Buccaneers was, you generated no pass rush whatsoever. When you're a team who's in desperate need of running back help because you did not get a consistent ground game to support your quarterback, I think you're still at the point where you say, okay, we can't really evaluate what we have here with Jameis yet. We have to get better pieces around him. So I would not expect that whatsoever. I think the second Tampa dropped Martin, they were declaring to the world, listen, if you let Barkley drop the 7, we're taking him. I think that'll be a great setup for Barkley. I think it'll be a great setup for Tampa. So that's where I expect them to go. They're in a nice spot because if, like we envision, 4 quarterbacks go top 6, then either one of Barkley or Chubb or Minka Fitzpatrick is dropping to them. And I think all 3 of those picks are great for Tampa. So that's what I would anticipate.
Either way, as Ben is detailing here, the Bears should be in good position. Even if it's not 4 quarterbacks, if it's 2 or 3 quarterbacks, that means you're having guys like Calvin Ridley, you're having guys like Roquan Smith, you're having guys like Tremaine Edmonds all being available there for Chicago. We're going to get to that in a second, but Ben, I thought we would do this where we would pick some of our bigger post-combine risers. I don't know if you have a specific guy for each position necessarily that the Bears need, so like receiver, edge, for example. But when I say post-combine riser, you understand. I'm just explaining to the listeners where guys that will kill the testing and have their draft stock go significantly up, even if their production maybe doesn't necessarily match them being a physical specimen by any means. So let's start at receiver. Biggest post-combine riser at receiver after this weekend.
So I think you've already seen it begun. And to me, that's Auden Tate, kid out of Florida State. Okay. All right. An animal already on tape, a guy who's got incredible, height, weight, speed sort of a profile, but then he also runs good routes. He's got a great contested catch ability, but he came in a skosh under 6'5". He's 6'4", 7'8", 228, 33 and 6/8 inch arm. So one of the biggest boys, if not the biggest boy, that's going to be playing there at wide receiver at the combine. Now, he's still going to be a guy who I expect to run, in the 4.5s solidly. And we talk about a guy like Cortland Sutton out of SMU. This is another big-bodied wide receiver who everybody says, his draft stock is highly dependent on what he runs. He needs to have decent long speed. Auden Tate's stock also relies on that a little bit, but I trust in Tate's long speed significantly more than I do in Sutton's, at least off of tape. I hope that both of them run in the 4.5s. Both of them are going to be good players. But Tate is also a guy who was born in the beginning of 97. So he just recently turned 21. This is a third-year junior. He has a bit of an injury history, but he came out quickly out of Florida State because that wasn't a good situation for him, and he knew that his age was going to make him even more valuable. So we got a young, physically powerful wide receiver. I know that may be a little bit of a trigger for Chicago Bears fans because Kevin White was not dissimilar as far as an evaluation coming out of West Virginia. However, I think that Auden Tate gives you a lot more consistency as far as route running and separation than Kevin White ever did. And obviously, barring the medical rechecks that will happen at the combine, I don't think Tate's problems are going to be as long-term. This is a guy who played through a shoulder injury for half of the season with Florida State, right? And he was fighting through pain, doing excellent work there. He's an incredibly strong player. And so Auden Tate is a guy who he has that physical profile. He has that low age that you like, especially in wide receivers. And I think the combine is going to test very well. And that's just a player you draft. He's going to give you solid upside. He can be a great performer for you, year 2, year 3 down the road.
Before we go with other positions, I understand the risk, but just again for everyone listening, talk about the risks of investing in guys that again that probably are more have their stocks rise up so far because of the combine and not necessarily their tape or solely their tape. So talk about the risks there.
Right. So when it comes to using combine numbers, they always have to be contextualized. All data that we have with any NFL draft prospect, whether it's their market share or their age or their breakout age or their athletic testing, it all needs to be contextualized and understood within the full image of the player, right? That's what we always talk about. And so when it comes to how a player performs, well, if I'm, checking out wide receivers and I have, a smallish little slot guy, he doesn't have great hand size, he doesn't have great height or whatever, but he comes down, he runs an exceptional 3-cone, he has a great 10-yard split, and he runs a great short shuttle. These are drills that measure explosiveness and change of direction. Then I know that he's got what I would call a high floor, right? He's got a high athletic floor where he's a guy who clearly has the athletic tools where I can get him to be a quick separator, right? And so one of the first things that I use combine numbers for is to understand, can I get a high floor player, a player with a high athletic floor? He has such great testing that I know he's a good enough athlete that I can use him somehow. Maybe it's just as a punt returner, but I can get something out of him because that makes me feel better, as always, about drafting a guy. So that's number one. Number two, we contextualize, again, athletic testing on the tape. And so we say, okay, Auden Tate is going to come out and he'll say he runs a 4.56, which would be great for him. That'd be a nice number. Good for Auden Tate. Move on. Well, we got to make sure that a 4.56 looking player can hit 4.56 looking speed on tape. I'm not interested in how fast a guy is in his pajamas. I'm interested in how fast a guy is when he's got pads on. Well, the pajamas help me figure it out.
No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. I mean, No, the underwear Olympics obviously help me out. They help me understand that, and they do translate. But I do want to see a guy be able to put that out in the field. So Auden Tate, I expect to run well because I've seen him run well on the field, right? And so that's what is important to understand there. And then thirdly and finally, what athletic testing can help give us an understanding of aspects of a player's game that may or may not have been hashed out very well because of the way they were deployed. I think a good example is a guy who I expect to do very well at the combine is tight end Mike Gesicki out of Penn State. He's an ex-volleyball player, incredibly explosive young man, 6'5". Yeah, he's about 245 if memory serves, and he's going to jump about 37 in the vert, about 11 in the broad. It's going to be nuts because he's got great hops, right? And he was used at Penn State as a deep ball guy, a jump ball guy exceptionally well. I'm very interested, of course, to see those jumping numbers, but I'm also very intrigued by how he works in the short area quickness drills. I'm very interested to see his 10-yard split. I'm interested to see his short shuttle because I want to see if I can take that guy who was so good in the deep area of the field, who was such a good jump ball player, who had excellent work in the red zone, and also use him between the 20s as a quick separator, right? And so also athletic testing helps us illustrate aspects of the game that a player was not asked to do at their college and their university. So to me, numbers alone and no value. They only bear meaning and value when they contextualize what I've seen on tape. They help me answer questions that I was not able to answer simply by watching a player. Combine risers should rise because they responded to the question marks left on their tape. That's how the risers should work. And so for a guy like Tate to come in significantly big after, he bodied small corners is good. Like, that's answering a question, right? This is a guy who is objectively huge. It wasn't just he was beating up on tiny college kids. He is very large, and that's going to translate to the NFL. So that's how that works.
Perfect. As Ben said, just adds more context. Let's move to edge. So to me, I know a lot of people will say receiver is the biggest Bears need, but that's going to be easier to fix because great pass rushers don't hit free agency. And this isn't the best edge class at the top. So a post-combine riser for defensive edge because the Bears really have nothing next to or behind Leonard Floyd.
Certainly. When it comes to edges of the combine, I'm watching one drill above all the other drills. I'm super interested in how they perform in the 3-cone. The 3-cone really, that L drill, measures their ability to head one direction, put their foot in the ground, and get up going, 90 degrees off in another direction. And that's turning the corner against offensive tackles. And so I'm very interested in the speed with which they can turn that corner. Guys who I expect to really kill that drill are Josh Sweat, That's the edge there out of Florida State. He's a guy that I like. I think Jeff Holland, edge out of Auburn, is another guy who's going to do very well. But the one I'll give you will be Kamoko Toure. That's a young kid out of Rutgers. Toure was a guy, freshman All-American at Rutgers, incredible sack production numbers. He just was ripping it there in Rutgers. And then all of a sudden, 2 shoulder surgeries and his 2 seasons, next season are lost, right? Then he comes back out in his senior year. He's productive still, but he was asked to do a lot more run defense, a lot more 2-gapping, a lot more slow playing in the way that Rutgers was deploying him, which was not good for him. That did not maximize his skill set. However, this is a guy who's really radically changed his body over his time at Rutgers. He came into Rutgers at like 215, 220 or something absurd. He's up to about 252, hopefully around 255, maybe even closer to 260 at the combine. We'll see how he weighs in. Any more mass that he can add is great for him. But this is a guy with special ankle flexibility. This guy with special knee flexibility. He does stupid things. I was able to see him at the Senior Bowl, and he just it's not regular, man. It's not human. It's unpleasant what he's able to do, and tackles hated it down in Mobile, right? And that was really a great opportunity for him to start the drum, right? To show that he can do that in one-on-one sort of reps, and that certainly caught the eye of all 32 NFL teams. You can't miss it. And so I guarantee you when he steps up through that 3-cone, everybody's backs are going to get a little bit straighter. Everybody's going to be leaning down, because if he puts up as good of a time as we anticipate, you now have a guy who can successfully bend the edge, and that's always going to be valuable. Medicals might push him down a little bit. I think because of his weight and because of his frame, he does fit a little bit better into, what we would call a 3-4 outside linebacker sort of a look, which is what you'll get out of Chicago with Vic Fangio. So I like very much what Toure could give to the Bears.
In regards to Sweat, because you mentioned him, he has his medical checks, I believe, are going to play a big factor there. No, I think you mentioned that too. This is a guy that had torn left ACL, a dislocated kneecap, a torn meniscus. I mean, it's not exactly clean, and for him, he'd probably be a higher pick if not for that.
Oh, certainly. And that's one of the things that we'll miss, is that oftentimes combine risers are, if not solely because of, they're at least accompanied by clearing a medical check, right? Because Josh Sweat, Kamoko Toure, these guys have, day 2, maybe early day 3 sort of tape for a lot of people, but you're going to be very concerned about taking them in day 2 because you're very, very concerned about, are they going to be just a one-contract player? How much can they see the field? They're going to come out, and before they do any athletic testing, they're going to go through the medical recheck tent. What happens when they say, all right, Josh Sweat, the ACL cleared well, the knee looks fine, it should be structurally sound. Well, already NFL teams are saying, okay, that makes it easier to draft this guy. And then from everything that I'm hearing from Florida State, Josh Sweat's going to murder the entire combine. He's everything, right? He's just going to blow it out of the water. And so I talked about Toure at the Senior Bowl. You start the drum by clearing your medicals, right? And all of a sudden teams are saying, okay, wait, maybe we can take this guy. Maybe we can trust this guy. Then you have to step out in the field, not 1-2 days later, you put up good numbers. That's how your rise really begins, right? And so I think, identifying Sweat and Toure as 2 guys who could rise is due in large part to the fact that they do have shady medicals right now. And if one of them is able to clear the medical test very, very well, then all of a sudden teams are going to feel a lot safer about drafting them, and you're going to start to hear more buzz around their names.
Moving over to tackle, so this isn't as necessarily as big of a priority as other positions, but if the Bears could upgrade on the right side and replace Bobby Massey, they probably would. So before we get to a post-combine riser, I actually wanted to start with this topic because this is something that's certainly going to pick up a little bit of steam over the next 2 months. Quentin Nelson, the guard, how would you feel about him at tackle? And if he's a tackle, he's not making it out of the top 3. I think we can safely say that.
Oh, most definitely. And Nelson is a guy who's so talented. I would be very surprised if he made it out of the top 10 period. I don't really care where you're playing him. Mm-hmm. But yeah, Nelson is a guy who has a tackle level frame. He's been playing a guard for most of his career, from what I understand. He seems to me talented enough that you could play him anywhere you want on the offensive line. When I go to his tape, you could put him at freaking tight end and let him catch passes, right? This guy's an absolute animal. He's athletically very sound. He's a fantastic player. The question becomes, if you're moving him to tackle, why are you moving him to tackle, right? If you're at the point, to me, where you're moving him to tackle because, that's a much higher value sort of a position, and you'd have desperate needs there, and you have 2 guards set up, okay. I would bring the guy in for one of my 30 visits. I would test him at a lot of tackle sort of situations. I would test him off the edge a ton more just to get a better feel for how that might look, to make sure there's no footwork reason that he's never really been put at tackle despite having his frame. But if you're at the point, in my opinion, where you're, rough across the entire offensive line, like let's say the Colts draft Quentin Nelson, they got nobody on that offensive line, and they go and try to move him to tackle right away. To me, that's kind of silly. You know what I mean? Play a player where he's at his best right away, maximize him there. I'm all for guys who played tackle in college to get their first look at tackle, like Connor Williams out of Texas, Martinez Rankin, this kid out of Mississippi State, even Tyrell Crosby out of Oregon. These are 3 tackles, have good tape, did good work at the collegiate level, and people want to move them into guard because of their measurables and because of the way their frame holds up. To me, if a guy was a tackle, let's start him at tackle first. Let's make sure that he really can't hold his water there, because tackle is such a higher position of value. And then let's move him into guard. I always want to have my higher impact players on the outside because that's a higher impact position.
Absolutely.
But that being said, that's really more so for guys who started at tackle, and then maybe I move them inside because that makes more sense. For a guy like Quentin Nelson, unless you're at the point where you've got 4 great offensive linemen and you draft Nelson with the intention of moving him to tackle, I would probably bring him into the building, play him at guard to start, year one, make him a guard sort of a guy. And then if you want to, when you have him in the building, see if you could develop him into a swing tackle. Like in the event that you get an injury to one of your tackles, bump Nelson outside and put a guy in the interior, because again, tackle is the higher value position, then okay, right? But as far as how I'm evaluating Nelson, he's going to be evaluated as a guard on my board. I think he's going to be drafted as a guard by a team that needs a guard, but he certainly has the frame and he seems to have the physical ability to go out there and play tackle. So if you want to make that move, first, I would bring him in to visit, but you can pull it off.
Yeah, and if anything, too, for in regards to the Bears, they have the connection there. They have his college offensive line coach, Harry Hiestand. So if Hiestand thinks he can make the move, there's probably no one better to make that evaluation and to make that transition immediately.
Excellent point, yeah.
So as far as the post-combine, I think I'm going to guess it's one of the other names you mentioned, but a post-combine riser, Ben, at tackle.
I mean, yeah, it could be one of those guys. I don't think Crosby is going to blow the testing out of the water. He strikes me more as a smooth guy than an explosive guy as far as his athleticism goes. I think you could see Jamarco Jones out of Ohio State have a good combine, a guy who could rise. But the guy who's, I'll kind of put a star next to his name. You've already started to hear a lot about him, but he's just going to be a guy who gets NFL teams excited the moment he steps up onto the scales. Colton Miller, that's out of UCLA. This is a guy who I think you're going to see him as a riser more so in the sense that you're going to start to see him in a lot more, back end of round 1 mock draft sort of situation, teams late in the first who need a tackle, who are maybe have time to develop a guy. Colton Miller is 6'8.5". This kid is 3'10". He's got apparently 11-inch hands and 34-inch arms. So this is a very large human being, right? Now, I've always been,
like Andre the Giant, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. And I've always been of the opinion, and when I watch Miller's tape, this is how I feel about him. At some point, height starts to hurt you on the offensive line, especially at tackle. If you watch Miller try to build a base in pass protection, you very often see that his knees buckle because his legs are so long. It's really tough for him to maintain an athletic triangle, that triangle of tension, that tensegrity that we like to see as tackles build their base. He struggles to hold that because he has so much mass and so much length, right? And his legs are so long, and it's harder to hold that mass over length, right? Like, you'd want a guy to be a little bit more squatty, a little bit shorter, a little bit more compact in that way. That's how I prefer my offensive linemen. I understand why length is valuable on the outside, right? A guy like Orlando Brown is a great example of this kid out of Oklahoma State. Equally as massive. Orlando Brown is 6'8", 345, 35-inch arms, right? If you can beat Orlando Brown around the edge, you're about 10 yards behind the quarterbacks. He's just too big, right? So I can understand that value, but Brown is a guy who's got significantly more mass than Miller, so he's harder to go through. As Miller, he doesn't build a very strong base. I think you can go through him if you're a smart edge rusher, right? That being said, Miller is excellent on the hoof, especially for a guy who's 6'8", 6'9", and he's got that huge length, he's got that huge size, and so I think he's going to tip the scales very well. It's going to get NFL teams excited. Then you're going to see him move, and he's not going to be as laborious as a Brown or a Chukwuma Okorafor or a Tyrell Crosby, any of these guys. And that movement plus length is really going to get NFL teams excited. You're going to start to see him in the back half of mock drafts more. I'm not as sold on his eval, but I think his physical profile is going to get people excited.
Yeah, I think the player we often think of with these tall tackles, and I don't want to necessarily compare it to a guy that was a first ballot Hall of Famer, but Jonathan Ogden. And Ogden was so good because he was unnaturally flexible for the guy that was 6'9", 345. I mean, like, he has the build of Orlando Brown. To be able to find that guy, but he was the number 4 overall pick for a reason. I mean, he was a generational prospect, so it's a little different coming out in that respect.
Yeah, certainly.
Cornerbacks. So this is something that's a little more fluid. The Bears are currently working with Kyle Fuller. Prince Mukamara is on the bubble. Cornerback post risers. There's like storylines with Dante Jackson running the fastest 40, but that won't necessarily correlate in him having his stock rise up so much, or unless you believe it will. So who's someone here at corner?
At corner, who I think you can potentially see rise, and all of these top names, it's really interesting. You know, I was talking about this on the Benjamin Solak show, the pod that we have with BGN Radio. All of these top names for the cornerback class have huge things to prove. As far as like Josh Jackson needs a good 40. Denzel Ward apparently is a physical freak. He's insanely fast, so he's got to show up. Jaire Alexander has huge work to do in medical rechecks because he's got a bad history. Dante Jackson of LSU has got to fly. Carlton Davis is a great press corner, but he looks a little bit slow, so he's got to come under 4.6, right? All of these guys have huge stuff to do. I think that your biggest workout warriors who are really going to impress are going to be Isaiah Oliver out of Colorado. And then also Quentin Meeks out of Stanford is an incredibly smart player who apparently is going to test bananas. And if he really comes out with that athleticism that we're hearing from his camp, get put next to his tape, Quentin Meeks deserves to be more so in the conversation for round 1 corners than he's currently been. It's an incredibly thick and exciting cornerback class, and he should put his name forward in a big way. So I think Meeks is going to jump very well, and so he's going to be a guy who we see do good work. As far as Isaiah Oliver, that's a pentathlete. That's a guy who's like, you know, as a national decathlete or some nonsense. Like, it's absolutely absurd. So we expect Oliver to come in at a good weight, like 190, 195, and then still run like crazy, still test like crazy, have excellent agility. Oliver's a punt returner, sort of a player as well. So he'll really impress me. And then I think once you go a little bit further down, you know, maybe into the later rounds and you try to find a guy who has a lot of work to do with his testing, I'm really Dawson tests. Number one, because he's right on that height edge as far as, you know, 5'10", 5'11" is who's going to be exclusively a slot player. Is he a guy who has, you know, some versatility inside and outside? And then Duke Dawson is somebody who a lot of pundits expect to run, you know, not great. We've seen these Florida corners come out recently and run in the 4.6s. Obviously, Tease Tabor was a 4.7 guy. So they're expecting Dawson to run in the 4.6s. I expect him to run the 4.5s. I think he's got good speed, better speed than we think. I think he's got better initial explosiveness off the 10-yard. And so Dawson is a guy who I think his physical profile gets a little bit underestimated. I'm really interested to see if he has the short area quickness and the initial explosiveness, the 10-yard split and the short shuttle that I thought I saw on tape. Because if he does, that means he's a lock and load slot guy who may even be able to give you boundary play depending on how tall he is. And he's thick too. He's 200, 205, right? And so he's got some good size to deal with these physical wide receiver. So Dawson's a guy I feel has been a little bit slept on. I said very good corner class, and I think he's going to test a little bit better than people expect. So that's a name to watch.
So this is also another fluid thing. I will note, since I have an Eagles guest on, that the Bears might fill this with Trey Burton, because if you're going to follow, if you believe in social media conspiracies, Mitch Trubisky followed Trey Burton on Instagram a few days ago. So, oh man, connect the dots there. But tight ends. So this isn't the strongest tight end class. There's not exactly not the historic 2017 class, but there's, in my mind, I've been watching them in the past few days, there's a lot of guys that you could qualify as solid joker type, solid number 2 guys down the line with depth. So post combine riser at tight end.
Yeah, I agree with you. I sold in this tight end class, and the further and further I've gotten into my evaluations, the more and more I like it. Right. I mean, I've got 4 guys with round 1 or round 2 grades in this class, which is a solid number. In my opinion, you're going to do fine there. I think that into day 3, there's a lot of guys who can play certain roles for you, right? Who you can fit in certain ways. So you can go get the guy that you want. If I check out, when I look at the Bears and obviously bringing in Adam Shaheen, the kid out of Ashland last year, Shaheen is a guy who obviously gives you excellent wide receiver ability. He's a great athlete. He's an excellent mover in space, great size. He's not giving you much as far as blocking goes. And so I could see them going the direction of a Ryan Izzo, a Dalton Schultz, Florida State, Stanford. These are 2 excellent blockers, maybe even a little bit later Bisley out of Washington and David Wells out of San Diego State. These are good players who can give you good blocking ability. But the guy that I expect to rise, who I think the further and further people get into his tape and the more and more they watch him play and then see how he tests in Indianapolis, is Durham Smythe out of Notre Dame. These Notre Dame pass catchers are incredibly difficult to evaluate because Brandon Wimbush, quarterback for Notre Dame, was booty. He was just not a great quarter. And so as a result,
that's swearing on the podcast, Ben. That's swearing on the podcast.
Robert. I'm sorry. So Durham Smythe is a guy who's incredibly low career production. He was just simply asked to stick in there and block. Notre Dame running a spread style of offense there. And he was asked to just come across, split zone, and just light people up, stay in line, hold on deep. He's got excellent blocking ability, but I really think the receiving upside is there. You saw it in the limited tape where he was catching it. You saw it again in Mobile when he was there for the Senior Bowl, and now he gets to come to the combine, and we get to test how well he moves in space. We get to see that up against all the other top tight ends in this class. I think Smythe's a much better athlete than we realize. I think he's got great hands, and I'm very interested to see what his hand size comes in as, which I think those numbers have recently been released. I think he's got big mitts, and so that's a good prognosticator that he'll be able to catch well. And so I think Smythe is a guy who can give you much more than you ever saw from him in college.
Running backs. So this is more of a luxury at this point, but there are rumblings that I have heard that the Bears aren't as in love with Jordan Howard long-term as many fans in Chicago will want to believe. So for the time being, that they would like to draft a third guy that can catch and run and give you both the best of Jordan Howard and Tariq Cohen. So a post-combine riser at tailback, someone that can fill that void.
Yeah, to me, that's a pretty easy answer. That's Nyheim Hines out of NC State. And, the Jordan Howard news doesn't surprise me too much. I don't know if Jordan Howard is viewed as anything more than a one-contract player. I think that's a guy he's going to get beat up a ton given his play style, his shoulder history. But Nyheim Hines is not, a size guy the way that Howard is. Hines is probably going to come in about 5'9", 195, 200 there for the combine. Excuse me, 5'10" for Nyheim Hines is what I would say. But this is, number one, an excellent zone style runner. The Bears run a ton of inside wide zone, and Nyheim Hines fits perfectly into his zone system, right? He's got excellent initial burst as a track star, right? He was a 60-meter, 100-meter dash star before he went to NC State. He's going to blow the doors off the 40-yard dash. We're expecting sub 4.4. Some are expecting sub 4.35, which is just going to make his stock go through the roof. And then he definitely gives you pass-catching ability, very nicely elusive in space. And he also has special teams return value as well, which obviously you've got that with Tariq Cohen, but that never hurts to add as far as a depth chart addition goes. So, yeah, if the Bears are really looking to bring in a guy to maybe take some reps off of Jordan Howard to run some more traditional zone stuff, Nyheim Hines is the quick target.
All right, that should just about do it for the main positions of need. Ben, so I want to gauge just some quick juxtaposition here. Number 8 overall. We can kind of wrap it up on these last few points. So number 8 overall, Bears sitting there. Roquan Smith is available. Tremaine Edmonds. Make your case for both, and then who you would actually take. If that makes sense.
No, absolutely. From what I understand about the Bears scheme, obviously, I'm not super deep into the way their defense operates. Tremaine Edmonds has been my linebacker 1, will remain my linebacker 1, and he would be my pick. Roquan Smith is an exceptional talent. He's a ton of fun. He's going to be a great player somewhere. But it is irregular to find 6'4", 250-pound linebackers who move the way that Edmonds moves, changes directions the way that Edmonds changes directions. And Edmonds is a guy, because he's exceptionally young, because he's coming into the league as a 19-year-old, right? You know that you're going to be able to get more out of him once he's 21 without even touching him, right? He's just going to develop as he grows. He's going to develop as he matures and gets older. And you saw that. Watch Virginia Tech tape sequentially this year in time chronologically, and you're going to see a player who got better and better week in and week out. He was better at diagnosing. He was more aggressive. He trusted himself better, right? That's what you're going to get when you bring in a young player like this. So not only is Edmonds, do I think, a top talent, I think he's got the highest ceiling of any player in this class, right? And that includes your Saquon Barkley and all of your quarterbacks, Lamar Jackson. I think Edmonds has the ability to come in and be a perennial all-pro linebacker by year 3. Right? Because you just don't find physical talent like the way you found it with Tremaine Edmonds. And so he would be a guy who I would love to see in any sort of situation where you're in need of a linebacker, which Chicago certainly is. I would love to see Chicago be able to work him, not necessarily with 3-4 outside linebacker edge, let Tremaine Edmonds cover tight ends carry those in man coverage. So working him onto the edge a little bit in that way. And people talk about, shifting him to the edge and everything, which to me, I don't want to teach the 19-year-old any new skills just yet. I'd rather hash out his skills at his position and make sure that he's rock solid linebacker before I start to give him any more edge work. But you could certainly see 3, 4, 5 years down the road, and this is a multi-contract guy, no doubt. You're going to be signing him to his next contract when he's 23, 24. I could certainly see down the road him being a guy who can give you excellent edge rushing on top of the fact that he's already a great blitzer from the interior. Tremaine Edmunds is the ideal front seven player for a modern NFL defense to me, and he's young and he's going to test out of the roof. And so Edmunds to me is the quick answer. No worries.
Yeah, extremely shameless plug. In my first piece for Pro Football Weekly, I compared him to Anthony Barr. I think he's the ideal guy. He's the ideal guy a 2018 NFL defense wants, someone to build around. And in that respect, for the Bears to be able to have two guys like that, and Leonard Floyd won't be on the level of him because Leonard Floyd's already almost 26 years old, but to have two guys that you can essentially move all over your front or switch around their responsibilities every series or every play to keep an offense consistently on its heels. I mean, that's what you're looking for. That's what Vic Fangio would love. That's kind of the straight up talent he had years ago in San Francisco. And Edmunds is more of a centerpiece in that respect. It almost makes too much sense. But if they did go with Roquan Smith, you mentioned it a little bit before going into Edmunds. I mean, how's his fit? He'd be more of, I haven't broken him down as much because I focused on Edmunds and the guys the Bears need, but he'd be more of the inside linebacker, the guy next to Danny Trevathan, I'm assuming, correct?
Oh, certainly, yeah. Roquan Smith put about 4 to 5 yards behind line of scrimmage directly in the middle of the field and say, listen, wherever the ball goes, go get it faster than everybody else because he can. And there's about 3 people in the world who can, right? Mm-hmm. This is the guy who, to me, my comp for Roquan Smith, the way that I understand his game is when Telvin Smith came out, right? Telvin was the guy who everybody said, oh man, exceptional talent, incredibly quick to diagnose, insane closing burst, great speed, but we're worried about his size. Does he have to move to safety? Roquan Smith is all of that stuff without the worries about the size moving to safety. He's still smallish for linebackers, but he's perfectly fine. He's not going to move to safety. That's ridiculous. But he still gives you that ability to key, close, and shut down in a way that is highly irregular. Like Roquan Smith in 16 games is going to give you 16 plays, 1 per game, where it's 3rd and 3. The offense has the right play dialed up, and Roquan Smith just gets there faster than any other human being should and stops it and just kills the drive. He has that level of ability, right? He also excellent in coverage as well, which he's going to be more so dropping into short zones given his alignment with the Chicago Bears, which he's perfectly fine there. Obviously, more experience is going to help him out because you don't see that very often as far as what collegiate linebackers are asked to do, but the physical profile is certainly there, and he's a heady, good, smart player. And so you imagine that he's going to be able to grow in that. To me, he does not give you the upside that Edmunds gives you, but that's a plug-and-play starter on day one. He could very likely have a better year one impact than Edmunds does. So it's a plug-and-play starter on day, be going to multiple Pro Bowls, given the way that he's been able to perform.
When it comes down to it, any player available or how it'll shake out, Ben, I want you to make a pick for the Bears at number 8, like just of any name. So not that comparison. Make a pick and then state why. If it's Edmunds, just say Edmunds.
Yep, to me it's Edmunds.
Okay, perfect. Final non-football conversation. I'm going to give you two comparisons. So if you're going to pick from 2, in your words, booty Star Wars characters that were thrown in as marketing, what's the word for it? Ploys? Yeah, ploys. The Porg or Ewoks?
Like which one do I prefer?
Which one, if both are about to be thrown into like a Toy Story 3 vat of fire where they're burned, and you can only save one? And I know that's very graphic.
I like it. I'd probably save Ewoks out of the nostalgia, man. I mean, I grew up on those movies, and so yeah, I'm not nearly as emotionally invested in the Porgs as I am in the Ewoks.
Okay, so that makes this very easy then. Save the Ewoks or Groot from going into the fire.
Save Gru. That's not even that's a dumb question. You save Gru every time. Gru is an advanced life form. He's a guardian of the galaxy. Ewok is like a smaller bear.
Yeah, man. I mean, that popped up in my timeline the other day, and I was so mad. I was like, how would anyone ever even make that comparison for any like awful marketing? But like Groot's unique. Like he only says one word, but he's a guardian of the galaxy. He's awesome. I mean, I don't even know how anyone would not consider saving him. It would take putting him next to a truly iconic like lead character to let him die. But in that respect, you have to throw out the life raft for him. You have to take the little claw out and like take him out like the toy he is. Like
100%.
So frustrating. My nerd rage was at an all-time high, Ben. My nerd rage was at an all-time high there. So
I understand those issues, man. I feel that.
I'm glad we're on the same page. That should just about wrap up this episode of Windy City Gridiron Radio. Ben, thanks for hopping on. Really great insight on a lot of different things. And I appreciate you scaling back your swearing, because man, that was slander. That was very slanderous. But you were able to hold it together. I appreciate that. I can see why you call yourself Captain America pre-serum. I can see that.
I do appreciate it. Yeah, that's a self-assumed title. But no, man, Rob, thanks for having me on, dude. I really enjoyed it.
You guys can follow Ben at Benjamin Solak on Twitter. So as mentioned, he does a lot of great draft work for NDT Scouting LLC, which is a great draft website. They're making draft guides, and they're doing fantastic coverage through the next 2 months and evaluations. Check all of that out there. Ben also does work at Bleeding Green Nation, so there's our Eagles sister site at SB Nation. If you ever need Eagles information, scouting reports, whatever else, check that out as well. He recently started with BGN Radio, which is a big platform. Give him a follow, no doubt. And then follow us on Twitter at WC Gridiron. We will obviously have more Bears draft stuff, more free agency stuff for you as things develop over the next few weeks and months. And then follow me on Twitter, as always, at Robert Zaglinski. You know me. You love me. Come on. Put it out there. and to wrap this up, my favorite catchphrase. I know it's cheesy, guys, every time, but I appreciate you listening, and stay classy.